Hello, everybody, and welcome to another edition of Good Stuff. My name is Kevin Bille, and as always, we appreciate you joining us. Hope everybody had a nice Christmas, and I'm happy today to be joined by Bernie Holliday. He's the Director of Mental Performance and Learning for the Pittsburgh Pirates. Bernie, what's going on?
Hey, Kevin, I appreciate having me on. It's great to be here with you.
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to this. I've enjoyed our time together. Let's start there, Bernie. I don't know. Maybe you're like the seventh or eighth pirate I've had on. I want to talk about this a little bit later, but we connected down in Florida last year. And I want to jump in right away to a tool or exercise that I know you guys did, but then you even went a little bit deeper in when I asked this question, and I use it all the time. I use it with clients. I use it with my kids constantly. So thank you. But let's talk about this one up and one down. If you want to dive in a little bit deeper to the one you gave me, that 3-2-1, please.
Sure. It's something that we actually stumbled upon when I was with the Pirates. We wanted to be, and we were encouraged to be, a feedback-rich organization, to really kind of go into that radical candor direction. And one of the things that the coaches always wanted to be a part of were our conversations with the players. When we did group talks talking about the mental game, mental principles of excellence, the coaches would always ask, hey, can I sit in the back and listen? And a process that my team and I had, me and three other guys, was anytime we did something significant, we would pull into a room afterwards and just say, hey, I just gave that talk to that group of 50 athletes. Can you give me a one up, one down on how you thought it went? And the one up was basically something they thought hit and went well. The one down was something they felt could have been better or tweaked or adjusted so that it hit more on point with the target audience. So we got into this process of doing a one up, one down after every single talk, discussion, workshop that we did. And it became a good little part of our process of our foursome. So as the coaches started to ask, can I come in, sit in the back and listen and learn on some of your chalk talks? My response was always, of course, but afterwards you have to give me a one up, one down. And they're like, sure, absolutely, be happy to. And I would go through my half-hour talk with the players. We'd pull into the room afterwards. I'd go to the coach and I'd say, all right, coach, what do you got? Give me a one up, one down. And he would give me 5 ups and 0 downs. And I'm nowhere near that good. But it's funny how it took a lot of forcing, a lot of elbowing, a lot of nudging to get a one down out of the coach. And I realized how hard it is for people to give radical candor and constructive feedback and to feel comfortable in doing so. So as I started going through that process, it was really, I guess, magical in a sense how things transformed, because after the coaches would be in for a while doing one up, one downs for us after we did something, I found myself out in a bullpen session with the pitching coach. And that pitching coach and that player were working together for about 20 minutes on the bullpen session, working on different pitches, pitch shapes, how to attack certain hitters. And I'm there watching on the side. And then afterwards, I'm walking through the outfield with the coach back to the dugout. And he turns and looks at me with this weird look on his face. And he says, Bernie, you got a one up, one down for me? And it was a really cool moment because they took what we asked for and actually kind of brought it back on themselves. And it really sort of spearheaded this concept of one up, one down being a part of how we operate from the Pirates, and that being a part of how we give and receive feedback. So it was a really, I think, impactful way to help people get comfortable giving a down and then receiving a down in a way to move their process forward. It's actually funny, they've actually changed the name because they were so uncomfortable to a one up, one forward. They didn't like saying the word down. But it just kind of highlights just how hard it is sometimes to get feedback. And that was one of the processes that we went through.
Yeah. And the down, I think sometimes when I explain it to people initially, it's like a negative connotation, but ultimately it is like you're saying, it's things that you just can move forward with or progress. Go into the, like, if you want to, like, hey, I came down there for the weekend at Sarasota, and when I come home and process all that, talk a little bit more in depth of the 3-2-1 being the takeaway, the other one.
Yeah, the one up, one down is a really down and dirty way of getting feedback or giving feedback in the moment. The 3-2-1 is just a larger, more refined version of that, where it's really more of a self-reflection piece or group reflection piece. John Dewey, the famous educational reformist, says that we don't learn from experience, we learn from reflecting on experience. And it's a really good reflective tool, the 3-2-1. Basically, it's 3 ups. So let's say you go through a weekend tournament, and as a coaching staff, you get together after the tournament, you play maybe 5 games, and you say, okay, let's come up with 3 ups. What do we think went well this weekend and why? And the why piece is huge. The why is the process that allowed it to happen. A lot of people will say, I went 3 for 5 with 2 doubles. Okay, great. That's the what. Why were you able to do that? What allowed you to do that? What's the process? So the 3 ups in the why, then the 2 downs in the why, which is basically what could we have done better? What didn't go our way this weekend and why? Why be meaning the fix? How could I adjust it or make it a adjustment to make it better? And then the one is the takeaway. One lesson learned, one takeaway from the weekend. What's one big takeaway that you can stick in your back pocket and carry with you to the next tournament? So that 3-2-1 process was something that we did on a larger scale to reflect on and learn from an experience that we had together. And it's purposeful in the 3-2-1 in that because of the negativity bias, most human beings are wired to be able to really notice the negative things in their environment. So if left to their own devices, people would have 0 ups and 10 downs after something. So this is a little bit more deliberate, a little bit more proactive in forcing people to hunt the good stuff with the 3 ups and then fix the bad stuff with the 2 downs. And then no matter what, we're learning something. So there's always one takeaway, one lesson learned that we can carry forward. And if you're learning something, nothing's ever a failure. So that was sort of the 3-2-1 process that we've used from the 1 up, 1 down that we've expanded.
Man, I don't think I've ever told you that, but ever since I left there, I use it all the time. And one place that I use it with is my kids. You know, the 14, 12-year-old hop in the car and they don't need to say anything, right? I know if they had a good practice, they didn't have a practice, and and I try not to talk about the practice for a while, but ultimately I get to, hey man, just give me a 1 up, if it's a bad day. Well, I guess no, I mean, just tell me and anything 1 down that you can, I guess I could get better ball hand there. But the balance that it gives them, and the thing I need to thank you from a parent's perspective is the oldest one's an introvert. So this has really gotten him to talk and it helps, especially in the golf game, which he does. So thanks a lot. Hey, I also want to start. What's that? Go ahead. I'm sorry.
I was going to say, I think you hit the nail on the head when you said it really levels out people who can be very emotional. And when they have a really good weekend, it's like there's 10 ups and no downs. And when they have a really lousy weekend, it's 10 downs and no ups. This really does kind of get people into a really nice place where from weekend to weekend, they're in this sort of steady state and this balanced state going through their season. Yeah,
that's good. It's funny. I don't think I've told you, but when I was a coach, I used 3 good, 3 bad. So we'd come back the next day and just, hey, give me 3 good and 3 bad. So somewhat similar, even though like we'd lose a game by 40, the bad would be like the bus didn't get in a wreck on the way home. Nobody got hurt. Or, sometimes you had to search harder. But one other thing I want to start with too, maybe because I'm so intrigued with it, but I'd love to know what was so special about your time at West Point. I've never been, I've always wanted to go. I've heard of things, but just dive into that a little bit if you could, please, Bern.
Yeah, I spent 6 years at West Point. The first 4 years were working with cadet athletes on the mental side of their 4-year experience. And that's that's not just the athletic side, but their grade is comprised of 3 areas. They've got the academic grade, the physical grade, and the military grade. And those 3 things are combined together to create their class ranking within West Point. So my job was basically to take this high performance psychology specialty that I have and to help elevate their performance in those 3 areas, academically, athletically, and militarily. And in the last 2 years, what happened was we were so in the middle of these 2 wars going on, and a lot of our cadet athletes would graduate and go on to fight in Iraq or Afghanistan. And they would start calling back to us and saying, hey, I'm now leading troops. We're about to deploy in 8 months. The soldiers that are in my unit, they could really use the stuff that you taught my basketball team. Can you come out and teach my soldiers the same stuff you taught my basketball team 3 years ago? Wow. And we started getting more and more calls like that to bring us out into the field to train soldiers on the same stuff that they were trained at West Point as cadet athletes. So it was a really impactful period of my life because I never considered serving. It wasn't even in my mind when I was an 18-year-old kid. I was going to go to college, go through 4 years, play college tennis, get out, get a job somewhere, and start to live life. And serving in the military was something that wasn't even on my radar. And to be able to be there at that period, I got there right after 9/11. And so everybody that was coming into West Point at that time, they knew they were going to war when they graduated. The group before that, the juniors and seniors, were there prior to 9/11, and they probably never had any thought that they were going to be going to war right after graduation. Whereas this new group coming in during my time there, they all knew they were going to serve in war right after they graduated. So it was a very humbling, inspiring moment to be there because these people had, they had service at their heart. They had, that leadership at their heart. They wanted to be able to protect and serve our country at their heart. And it was really powerful to be around that group there. And on a funnier side, though, just that personality of West Point cadet athletes, they're largely engineering students. So they're very good at overthinking everything. And that just seemed to be the bulk of our work was how do we get people to think less, to process less, to be less analytical, less critical, less judgmental about everything they do. But that became sort of just the flow of the work for that 6 years was, how do you get people out of their heads in a sense, as opposed to think better.
Wow. Yeah, that's Thank you for sharing. I'm sure that had to be impactful in 6 years. You'll never forget about. I guess tell us how one decides on doing what you do, and I think what you do versus what people think you do. At least I've discovered now, having some other mental performance coaches on here, it's two different things. Maybe it's not in your world, but when I explain, hey, this is what they do. Well, no, it's not. So just give us a little bit of, an idea of that journey, how you made that decision, and hey, this is what I do on a daily basis.
Sure. And it's probably two big questions. I'll take the first part and kind of talk about how I got to doing this. And like I said, I was a collegiate tennis player, 4 years in college, and I hated largely every moment of it. Every year I'd finish up the season, I'd finish up that year and I'd be like, I'm never coming back. I'm going to throw the rackets under the bed. I'm not playing this sport ever again. I can't stand this. And it's not because of my coaches. I had great coaches. I had great teammates. It was because of my approach to the game, my thought process behind the game, the way I looked at the game, and the way I looked at myself. And it made for a very lousy 4 years playing collegiate tennis. So somewhere through my first year of college tennis, I started going to the gym in the evenings and hooking up with the men's club volleyball team, and started doing that in the evenings just as a way to decompress, as a way to just enjoy sport, a way to get away from tennis for a while, to be athletic and to be free and not carry all that burden that I carried for the tennis side of things. And it was so weird through that 4 years. I played on the men's club volleyball team alongside of playing collegiate tennis. And they were two completely different experiences. It was mind-boggling to me to figure out, why did I hate one sport so much and why did I love the other sport so much? And in fact, when you look back at it, I probably played volleyball 10 years after that and was a much better volleyball player, largely because of how I looked at the sport and how I looked at myself within the sport, and how that experience was so much different than my earlier tennis experiences. And so to fast forward, I graduated college. I was working full-time in the criminal justice field, which is where I went to school for. Basically catching shoplifters, walking around in t-shirt, jeans, baseball cap, carrying toilet paper under my arm, pretending to shop for 8 hours, and actually looking for people who were stealing things and then apprehending them and getting the product back and catching shoplifters that way. And I remember I had a job offer on the table to go down to the Caribbean to teach tennis as a teaching pro at a resort. And I'm like, well, I'm in my field. I don't want to go yet. And let me think about it. Can I have a week? And that was, I think, a day or two before I was trying to apprehend somebody trying to steal time and punch me in the ear. And I was like, I don't want to do this anymore. It was like the last straw of a series of experiences that just didn't want me to be in the criminal justice field. So I went down to the Caribbean, taught tennis down there for a season, and kind of went through this early life crisis. Like, what am I going to do? I got a degree in criminal justice and a minor in psychology. I love human behavior. I love sport, but I'm not really sure what I'm going to do with my life moving forward. And that's where I came across the field of sports psychology. I didn't know there was an academic discipline of high performance psychology and sports psychology until I was down there. And I started to read about it, became fascinated by it, realized that it aligned with my experiences playing volleyball and tennis. That was my anecdotal experience. And this was sort of the academic field that was describing what I was going through and why those experiences were so different. And at that moment, I'm like, I need to do this. This is what I want to do for a living. And that's where I applied for graduate school then, and that changed the arc of my entire life.
That's good. That's really good. I got to ask before I forget, have you read The Inner Game of Tennis? Are you a fan of it?
Probably the first book I ever read. And oddly enough, as a tennis player, I didn't understand it at all. I don't think I was at a place where I was ready to understand it. And looking back on it, it's a fantastic book, and it's the foundation for much of the things that I teach now.
Yeah.
So fantastic book, and I love it tremendously.
That's great. So give us just a little bit of an idea, though, like a quick snippet of, hey, this is what I do on a daily basis, regardless with the Pirates or some of the other people that you're working with.
Yeah, I think where we're misunderstood as a field sometimes is the idea of what is high performance psychology and what is mental performance. And that is very different than mental health. So whenever I tell somebody what I do, which is the high performance psychology side of things, I'm a mental performance coach, they immediately think about mental health. You're helping people with anxiety, with depression, with substance abuse, with domestic violence. And that's not what I'm trained to do. I'm not licensed to do that. And that's not what I've chosen to do. Like I kind of went purposefully on this high performance route. So that's why I think we're misunderstood. And whereas mental health really works from a medical model of, you look for something that's wrong, you then diagnose it, you then come up with a treatment plan for it, and then you activate that treatment plan and hopefully help that person become better. And I'm not really sure that's the right approach or mindset for high performance, which is more of a different mindset of how do we take you from good to really good consistently?
Yeah.
And then how do we go from really good to great if we can? But it's that opposite side of the bell curve, where I think mental health's focused on helping people function normally. I want people who are already functioning normally to function in an abnormally high way. So that's sort of the difference of how we operate, me being on the mental performance side of things. So it's really the idea that you don't need to be sick to get better. And how can we really maximize and optimize all of your talents?
Okay, I think I've got about 15 questions here now. I want to know, I guess the first thing that comes to mind, what would you say? What would you say are the key principles to elite performance coaching? And whether you're talking to an athlete, whether you're talking to a CEO, a teacher, whatever it might be, what are the key principles to just high performance?
As I think about that question, a mantra comes to mind that I learned during my time with Kyle Stark. I think Kyle may have been on your show at one point. Yep. But Kyle always talked about coupling together high care with high challenge. And that when you get that kind of an environment, or you get the kind of a leader that is really good at showing high care for his people or her people, but then being able to show high challenge for their performance, you get this really good magical balance. And I think that's when you look at high performance, whether it's an organization or as a pair of a coach player or a student teacher, it's that leader's ability to show high care for the person and high challenge for the performance. Mm-hmm. And I think what I've noticed in leadership is, or coaching even, is that coaches are usually better at one versus the other. Either you're really good at providing high care and just sort of nurturing and supporting the human being, but you may not hold them to a really high standard or have a really critical eye for what they do, or vice versa. You got a lot of coaches, I think, who are very critical on the court, in the field, and they hold to an extremely high standard, but they may not have that muscle flexed in terms of being able to provide high care to the person and really support the human being and show care that way. So it's that person that can really blend those two together and couple those two that I think that's where the beauty happens for high performance.
How do you compensate if you're, I look back at 25-year-old Kevin, 35-year-old Kevin, maybe even this day, I'm really good at the one, but maybe not as good as the other. What do you do if you're only having one? Is it a matter of when I'm putting together my staff, or I'm hiring, as the CEO or the boss, that I need to hire people who aren't like me to make up for that?
If you have the opportunity to do that, I think that's a tremendous approach. A lot of people don't have the luxury of being able to do that. They may already have the team in place that they need to work with, or they may not have the staff large enough to be able to even do that. But when possible, that's a wonderful approach, is to be able to balance yourself out with people who are different than you and to be able to kind of provide a skill set that you don't have. I think along the same lines, it's to surround yourself with those people that can provide you that radical candor. Yeah. I'm a big believer in blind spots, and that we need others to point out our blind spots. And they call them blind spots because we can't see them. So I may not even know that I'm not good at holding people to a high standard, and that I lean too heavily to the people pleasing side and wanting people to like me and wanting to make sure that I'm good with people and my relationship's good. And it takes sometimes a peer or a colleague or a partner of mine to be able to say, hey, you need to focus on here. This is a blind spot of yours. You don't do this well, and you don't think about it that often. I'm going to make sure you do. So I think having those people, I think Clint calls them the Mount Rushmore. You have those 4 or those 5 people that you would put on a mountain that need to be your accountability posse.
Yeah,
and
that's
I think
good.
they're the ones that point out that those blind spots to you.
Yeah, so I see the commonality now. I just talked to Rod about this. I love it. I love the Mount Rushmore. How many connections then, I was thinking of this earlier, do you see between the work you do in baseball and regular life outside of it?
I honestly think they're the same thing. The skill set that I teach baseball players and professional ball players and college volleyball players, on one hand, it provides me a tremendous fulfillment to watch them really advance, progress, grow, develop themselves within their sport. But what really kind of gets me going and gets me excited is when I get a call back from them 5 years later. And they're like, wow, Bernie, during my time as an Army tennis player, that stuff you taught me, I'm really using it now, as a manager in this company that I'm working for, or I'm really finding ways to use this with my spouse and my kids at home. and dealing with the stresses and the strains of being in this uncontrollable pandemic where I don't really know what's going to happen from day to day and week to week. And the stress management skills work here just as good as they worked as a tennis player. So I think those are the callbacks that I get that really excite me. It provides me a lot more fulfillment than helping somebody hit a curveball more consistently.
Yeah, right.
You know, is recognizing they've made that transition from high performance in sport to high performance in life. How can I be a better performer in all aspects of my job, all the demands of my job, all demands that I have around my family? And that to me, I think is the one and the same. Can you be at your best when your best is needed? And that happens oftentimes personally a lot more than it does professionally.
Yeah, for sure. Taking out that that high care, which I lacked as a coach sometime, but I would agree. There's nothing better than 5-10 years, you know, getting that call or getting that invite to the wedding or excuse me, whatever it might be. I think that's when it comes back full circle and why you do what you do. The wins are nice, the losses stink, but at the end of the day, I think when you hear from them, yeah, I would reiterate that. I want to go back to the Pirates organization, kind of with our common connections here. Rod just being on the podcast, Clint and Kyle have both been on here. I just want to know in terms of when they were there, you know, what made that time and that run so special?
There was a period in 2012 where we were the best team in baseball. We weren't consistently across that season, but there were weeks and there were months where we were the best team in baseball. And then 2013, 14, and 15, we were right there in postseason contention and playing really good ball consistently across those 3 years. And I think the same thing happened there in 16, where there were periods where we really peaked, but we weren't consistent that much. So there was a nice 5-year period where I thought we were firing on all cylinders for much of those seasons. And I think a lot of it comes back to something that I remember Clint Hurdle sharing his first year with us back in, I think, 2011. It was my second year with the organization, his first year. And he looked at the players and he looked at them in the eye and said, you know what? We are going to win our division this year. And immediately 2/3 of the room dropped their heads as though that was a shameful thing to listen to. And he called them out on it and said, you know, all of you just dropped eye contact with me immediately when I said this. Why did you drop eye contact with me? Why won't you look up and look me in the eye when I say this? And he got us to believe more than we were believing in ourselves. And he got us to set a higher bar than we were setting for ourselves. And then he got us to believe that we can get over it. And I think that was the beauty of Clint Hurdle in that period. And what we needed in that period was to have belief that we can succeed, we can win the division, we could go into postseason, when I think we were on our 19th consecutive losing season at that point. So you can understand why a lot of the players would drop their head in embarrassment when they're told they're going to win the division. And Clint, I thought, was really good at bringing that kind of belief and bringing that kind of fight every single day to, professional baseball.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's good. I now that I've gotten to know him more, I can see that, and I think it became synonymous with the town you were in, right? I mean, that's what was really cool about it too. Would you say there's a consistency with these high performers and even these top-notch cultures, if you will?
It seems like I haven't been around a lot. The ones I have been fortunate enough to be inside or to be able to look at from the inside out. It seems like there is a ton of consistency. I think that high care, high challenge piece is one of those consistent threads across the different cultures I've been a part of that I thought were more elite in nature. I guess the other part that jumps out at me is the amount of autonomy that the performers or athletes or staff members in there have. That they're not just being told what to do and they're following orders, but it's rather they're given a large part of the decision-making responsibility. They're given a large part of the problem solving, and they're giving a voice within what's happening. And it seems like that autonomy piece is something that every time I think about some of the teams I've been around that were high-level teams, the autonomy stands out to me. That they were given a voice, and because they were given a voice, they took ownership. And then they ran with that ownership and they made it theirs. It was no longer the coaches or the manager's team. It was their team.
That's really good. I mean, I don't know how often in the sports world you hear a coach-led team is a good team, but a player-led team can be a great team, right? I mean, I think that's what you're referring to. Would you say with the certain individuals that, or just the teams that you're dealing with, are there certain, I don't know what I'd call maybe nagging frustrations or certain things that drag them down on maybe is there something consistent there as well that, yeah, this one or two or three things is constantly happening across the board?
It's something that I heard referred to as a sigh of relief, I guess. And I think it happened to us with the Pirates in 2015. I think I've seen it happen with a couple of the teams I've been around recently, where you finally reach that next level of achievement. And it's something you've been striving to do. You've wanted to go from maybe the top 25 team to a top 10 team in the country to a top 5 team in the country. And now there's this sort of this sigh of relief, like, whew, we made it. And just how dangerous that can be, and how that can kind of settle into complacency, not in sort of a negative way, but just almost in a natural, organic way. We become comfortable that we've made it, and you lose that edge. You lose a little bit of that grit and that tenacity that you had to fight for to get to where you're at. So I know with the players that come from the Dominican Academy that we have, they talk about getting over to the States for the first time out of the Dominican Academy, and now they're in the States, and they have this, whew, I made it.
Yeah.
And how that can really set a player back, and that can frustrate a coach. And, you get that team that they made to the Final Four or the Elite Eight for the first time. It's like, ooh, now we're on the national stage, and how that can set a team back. So I think with the coaches, it's how do we keep that optimal tension, that optimal anxiety, where there's just enough angst and anxiety to keep pushing forward, but they don't get comfortable or complacent with that sigh of relief.
So how do you keep the optimal tension?
They were trying to still figure that one out. Pitt volleyball is a team that I've been lucky enough to be around a lot the last couple of years. And Dan Fisher, the head coach, is fantastic at that. Like he's got a really good feel for when the players are starting to buy into the hype that's around them a little bit too much, and he'll put his thumb on it right away and basically bring them right back down to the earth and bring them back down to the ground. And also recognizes when they're beaten up and then they're feeling defeated and they're feeling discouraged and frustrated. And that's when he can kind of elevate them back up a little bit. So he's found this wonderful balance of being able to sort of meet them where they're at and make that adjustment necessary. But yeah, it's just such a unique, individualized thing. And it's so hard to do. Yeah, I think part of it is just the awareness that it happens. I hate to I hate to share poetry with you, but I'll tell you a poem that kind of highlights it if you'd like to hear it.
Yeah, please go right ahead.
It's a poem called An Autobiography in 5 chapters. It's by a woman named Portia Nelson, and it's something that I've shared with a lot of athletes and coaches. But it's called an autobiography because I think a lot of us can relate to it. Chapter 1 is I walk down a street. There's a dark hole in the sidewalk. I don't see it. I fall in. It's dark. It's scary. I don't know how I got here. It takes me forever to get out. It's not my fault. Chapter 2 is I walk down the same street. There's a hole in the sidewalk. I pretend I don't see it, and I fall in. It's still dark. It's still scary. I still don't know how I got here. It takes me forever to get out. It's not my fault. Chapter 3 is I walk down the street. There's a hole in the sidewalk. I see it, but I've fallen anyway. It's become a habit. I know where I'm at. I know how I got here, and I climb out almost instantly. And then chapter 4 is I walk down the street. There's a hole in the sidewalk, and I walk around it. And then chapter 5 is I walk down a different street. And I think it really highlights sort of this learning process that we go through as athletes and coaches. And I think what you just highlighted was, that sigh of relief and being able to kind of overcome that is recognizing when we go from chapter 2 to chapter 3. It's like, you know what? This is a hole. I've fallen in this hole before. I know I'm here and I can get out. It is my fault. And then eventually getting from chapter 3 to chapter 4. I think when we recognize it, we've got that self-awareness or that collective awareness that this is a hole that we've fallen into as a team in the past. We fell into it last season. Now we know it's there. Now we can walk around it. So just bringing the attention to it, bringing the awareness to it, and getting the team from chapter 2 to chapter 3 to chapter 4 in that poem, I think is a big part of the process. There may not be actual X's and O's strategies for how to do it, but I think the awareness piece of being aware it's there, pointing it out, and then having that awareness and being able to recognize it sooner the next time it happens.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's really good. I've never heard that, because at the end of the day, you're not getting somebody from chapter 1 to chapter 5. You've got to go through 2, 3, and 4 to understand what 5 even is, right? And that's that whole process. But yeah, that's really, really good. Let's talk about a part of that process. A big part is stress. And I think I've heard you talk about it before. I don't remember if it was down there, but just talk about why stress can be valuable. I don't know if many people would recognize that portion of it, and just the balance of stress with recovery. And maybe even within this, just, provide some insight to stillness. So kind of collectively all of that there, if you wouldn't mind.
Yeah, stress is actually very beneficial in short doses. absolutely necessary for us to accomplish our jobs, to accomplish our goals. If you think about stress, what is stress? It's basically a mobilizing agent. It mobilizes us to accomplish something or to pursue something or to attack something. So stress by and of itself is essential for us to move forward. The problem is stress also puts us into this high burn rate where as we're going through it, we're burning a lot of energy mentally, emotionally, and physically. And that energy can eventually become depleted to the point where we can get ourselves into some trouble. So I think that's where the stress has to be balanced with recovery. I've got a mentor, Nate Zinzer from West Point, who was my boss for 6 years. And he used to say that hardcore stress requires hardcore recovery. And do you take your recovery as seriously as you take your stress? Because the cadet athletes there were really good at stressing. They were really good at mobilizing energy. They just never really prioritized the importance of recovering energy or restoring energy afterwards. And if you can get to that balance where you're mobilizing and then you're recovering, and then you're mobilizing and then you're recovering, mobilizing, recovering, that's where we want to be. That's our sweet spot as human beings.
Yeah.
But as life gets chaotic, the 21st century takes over, our demands get higher, our goals get bigger, uncertainty like the pandemic starts to kick in, we mobilize and mobilize and mobile we restore at the worst possible time. It'll shut us down to make sure that we restore. And that's when people get sick. That's when people get injured. That's where people basically have to shut it down and take a break. So the stress of itself is valuable. I think what matters most is how we view stress. If you have 15 minutes, it's well worth your watch, a TED Talk by Kelly McGonigal. And she's basically a health psychologist. And through her research, through her findings, and through this TED Talk, she talks about the fact that stress by itself isn't what hurts us. It's our negative view of stress that causes all the damage. And that when people saw stress as a mobilizing agent to help them accomplish cool things, they actually benefited from stress. When people saw stress as something that was going to be burdensome, that's going to weigh them down, that's going to sit on their shoulders, stress actually became very destructive in a person's life. So it wasn't stress that was harming people. It was their negative view of stress that was harming people. And I thought that was fascinating, that it's not the stress that hurts us, it's how we view the stress that matters. And to be able to take a more proactive, positive view that stress is a mobilizing agent that allows us to accomplish really cool things and achieve really cool goals. And without that stress, we're not able to mobilize the energy to do it. So I think another one is kind of seeing the nervousness as excitement. That when we think about our body getting nervous, we've got, sweaty palms like I have now, sweaty pits, our heart starts to pound. Our mouth gets a little dry. We get the butterflies, and I call them the 3 Ps, that right before something that really matters and we're stressed about it, we have to pee, poop, or puke. That we have this physiological response that most of us label as nerves, and we want to crush it, suppress it, deny it, make it go away. But really, when you look at all those things, they're all performance enhancers. Why does our heart beat faster? Because it moves blood faster to various parts of our body. Blood carries oxygen and glucose. So now we're getting oxygen and glucose to our large muscles, into our brain, into our senses, so we can think better, perform better, and move better. Why do we sweat? Because sweat is a natural air conditioner. And rather than waiting until the 3rd inning or 4th inning to turn on the AC, it turns on a half hour before the game. So that we're at this optimal temperature right at the very first pitch. Why do we pee, poop, and puke and we get butterflies in our stomach and our mouth gets dry? Because all of that's digestion. And digestion robs a lot of our energy when our blood goes to our gut and we're utilizing a lot of energy to digest. Our body says, you know what? I'm about to do something that really matters, that's important to me. So half hour beforehand, it shuts off digestion. So we get that pee, poop, and puke feeling. We get the butterflies. We get dry mouth, so that all that energy could be reallocated to our muscles and our brain so we can move better and think better. So our body gets us into this ideal state where we're ready to perform it and do awesome things. And we've been socialized to be afraid of that feeling and to see that feeling as a sign that, number one, I'm not prepared. Because if I were prepared, I wouldn't feel this nervous. And we know that's wrong, but that's what we're taught. We've also been taught to think that I must be weak, because if I were stronger and tougher, I wouldn't feel this nervousness. And any of the soldiers I've had a chance to talk with in combat would tell you that's absolutely wrong. And the third thing is, how could I possibly perform to my best when I'm feeling this uncomfortable? And when you talk to professional golfers on the 18th hole, on the 4th and final day of a round, and you ask them, how many of you putt that 18th hole for a championship with shaky hands? They'll say, every single time. My hands are shaking every single putt on the 18th hole on the 4th day. So we've been misled to believe that nerves are bad, but really nerves are performance enhancers, and stress is a mobilizing agent. So it comes back to the idea that it's not the stress and the nerves that hurt us. It's our negative view of the stress and the nerves that hurt us. So I'm going to shut up because I'm babbling now.
No. That is unbelievable. I want to. There's so many other things I want to talk about, but that's phenomenal. I'm gonna go back and watch this a couple of times to digest it. But it reaffirms. When I was playing, I'd always say I was worried when I wasn't nervous. It only happened maybe a handful of times, and I didn't know how to react to it. It was like, having those butterflies in my stomach. I played with a guy that puked before every game, and once he did, felt better. And so I wish I would have had you in college next to me there. That's huge. Yeah, that's really good. Thank you. A couple other things here that I know, at least I've enjoyed hearing you talk about, or you enjoy hearing, not yourself, but you enjoy talking about, excuse me. But tell me about this white belt mentality. When you told this story, I absolutely love it.
Again, I need to give credit to Doc Zinser, Nate Zinser at West Point. I first heard it from him. He's a black belt martial artist. That's a big part of who he is and how he operates, and sort of this martial arts philosophy. And he shared the story with me when I first got to West Point, and it's always stuck with me. So I've shared the story with every group that I've worked with ever since when I first introduced this idea of peak performance and high performance psychology. And it's a story about a guy named Jigarokano. And Jigarokano is basically known as the father of modern day judo. So judo is the martial arts that it is now. Everything that it's become, whether it's the different throws, the ground fighting, different sparring systems, the competitive structure for competitive judo, all of that really originated from Jigarokano. And what happened was, when it was basically just a small Japanese martial art, Jigarokano and some of his disciples would train, learn his ways, learn his methods, learn his principles, and then he would spread them throughout the world. And they're the ones that spread judo worldwide. So he was also, I think, the first Japanese individual who was on the International Olympic Committee, the IOC. And he was actually traveling over to the IOC's annual meetings to try to get judo more established in the Olympics and to try to get the Olympics back into Tokyo. And on his way back from that trip, he was on a steamliner, like a big ship, going across the ocean back to Japan with some of his friends and his closest family members, and they were traveling back with him. And he caught pneumonia. And it became very apparent to both himself and his friends and loved ones that were on the ship with him that he was going to pass before he got back home, that he was going to die on the ship. So when he was on his deathbed and his friends and family surrounded him, they asked him, "Master, what can we do to make your passing easier? What can we do to make sure that you're positioned to where you want to be as you pass off into whatever's next?" And he goes, "I ask one thing. Can you please bury me in my white belt?" And if you think about the white belt in martial arts is the beginner's belt. That when you walk into a dojo and you know nothing about the martial art that you're about to study or explore, and you walk in with this sort of beginner's curiosity, this beginner's fascination, and you know it's going to be hard and difficult. You're going to learn a ton, but you're going to get beaten up in the process. That's when you get the white belt and you walk in as that true beginner. And Jigarokano says, "I want to be buried in my white belt." And at first, his students and teachers didn't understand. They were like, "Well, why in the world would we do that? You are everything that judo's become. You've put judo onto the world stage. We need to bury you with honor and with respect." And he said, "Well, let me explain. I came into this world first as a learner before ever being a teacher. So whatever's waiting for me next, I want to have that same mentality, always as a learner first. So can you please bury me in my white belt?" And I think it's a powerful story because it really highlights the fact that we can all be lifelong learners. And this idea of being a learn-it-all rather than a know-it-all, because I think we've all been around know-it-alls plenty of times, but can you really kind of embrace that learn-it-all spirit and that metaphor of wearing your white belt, which is basically being willing to be comfortable, being uncomfortable, and seeking out discomfort to learn and grow, and being able to listen to and learn from everybody and anybody, everything and anything, to have that same sort of open lens to learning, no matter what environment you're in or no matter who you're around. And that to me really is what that white belt spirit is. And I think it's a great way to go through life.
Yeah,
and
boy.
I guess as you think about coaches, the one thing that I want our coaches and athletes to recognize is, hey, you might have black belt skill sets. You probably do as a professional ball player. You've got black belt skills and abilities. You've got black belt tools. Can you couple that with a white belt spirit?
Yeah,
and you get a pretty remarkable individual that can take their black belt skill sets and couple it with a white belt spirit.
Yeah. So why do many people struggle with that then, Bernie? Why do they not have that mentality? Or if one doesn't have it, how do they get it? Or if they're struggling with it in terms of, the learn it all versus know it all, constantly becoming uncomfortable and growing? What are you seeing when it comes to that?
I need to own this as my own bias. So I'm going to say that there's nothing scientific behind this. It's more just, I think, my own belief. And I think it's because people don't really believe they know it all. I just think they're afraid to be believed to be or found out to be a fraud. What's that imposter syndrome? That people are afraid to be vulnerable, to be looked at as, I don't know what I'm doing. I don't have it figured out. I don't have all the answers. So they put the guard up. Yeah. And then with that guard up, you got to kind of maintain that pose, pretend, and posture that you've got your stuff figured out. And even though I think in our hearts, we know I'm not that good at this, I could be better, man, I should be open to this. We don't want to convey that to other people. So we keep that guard up and we pose, pretend, and posture our way through life. The best environments I've been around from a learning perspective, it seemed like vulnerability was a tremendous part of that culture. And it came from the leadership first. I think about Clint, for instance. When Clint first came on board, he was one of the most vulnerable people in that clubhouse. And he would constantly highlight his flaws, talk about his wrongdoings, talk about his mistakes, and that he doesn't have things figured out. And I think when you have your leader, like Clint in that case, sharing his vulnerability, sharing his inadequacies, sharing his imperfections in front of his players and his staff, it gave them permission to kind of take that guard down and to be more vulnerable in their pursuit of excellence. So I think that vulnerability was, when done correctly, that becomes an extremely powerful way to get past that black belt know-it-all mentality and to get to that white belt learn-it-all perspective.
Man, we could talk for hours right now. I don't know if that's just point in my life, or I think it's just kind of how I'm wired, but I couldn't agree more. I just, it almost bothers me at times that people cannot be more vulnerable because of the criticism or because of the fear. I think it'd be a much better place to live if we could all just be a little bit more open to that. I'm on that train like nobody's business right now. Let's go into another favorite topic that you like to teach, and a couple other things maybe before we get into rapid fire. Let's talk about this trusting mindset with the think box play box. Give us a little bit of idea what that is exactly.
Another Nate Zinser lesson learned from me my first year at West Point. Again, Nate was a tremendous mentor. And one of the things that he said that was probably the most profound thing I heard during my time there, and it's forever stuck with my philosophy, is, Nate and I were in the break room, we were grabbing lunch, and Nate goes, Bernie, the psychology that brings skill in is very different than the psychology that lets skill out. And I sort of cocked my head to the side and looked at him cross-eyed and said, Doc, I don't understand what you're talking about. Can you say it again? He goes, yeah, the psychology or the mindset, the thought process that brings skill in, that allows us to acquire skill, is very different than the mindset or the thought process that allows skill to be exercised or released or enjoyed, that releases that skill. And what he was talking about, as I soon figured out through his mentorship, was that the psychology that brings skill in, we refer to it often as the training mentality, the training mindset. That it's a very analytical, very critical, very judgmental mindset. We analyze what we're doing. We're critical of whether it's right or wrong. We judge it as good or bad, and then we make adjustments. We do it all over again. And we become very good at analyzing, criticizing, judging, thinking, and becoming obsessed with mechanics. And that becomes sort of how we operate. We go through our lives trying to get better at something. We analyze it, we criticize it, we judge it, we overthink it, we over focus on the mechanics, and that becomes our primary mode of operation. Now, the problem with mindset, though, is when you look at when people are at their best and you ask them, when you're really freaking good, what do you like? They're like, I don't know, my mind's quiet, I trust myself, I'm free, I'm not thinking about mechanics, I'm not thinking about what my body's doing, I'm not worried or frustrated with myself or judging myself as harshly, I'm very forgiving of myself. And then you ask them, well, what do you like when you're lousy, when you're sort of in a rut or in a slump or struggling? Oh man, I'm overanalyzing everything. I'm being extremely critical of myself. I'm judging everything I do as right or wrong. Most of the time it's wrong. And I'm thinking all the time about mechanics and how my body's moving. I feel very mechanical and clumsy and rigid. And I feel like I don't feel free. And you realize that the same things they're describing when they're struggling are those byproducts of the training mindset, that the tendency to analyze, criticize, judge, and become mechanically preoccupied, that when you do them and that's all you have, they become your habits. And you develop the habit of becoming analytical, critical, judgmental, and overly mechanical. So under pressure, our most dominant habits always emerge naturally. Just when we're in pressure situations, our most dominant habits will just come out whether we're willing to or not. So even though we know we want to be free, we want to be focused externally on a target, we want to not get obsessed with body parts and body movements. What happens is under pressure, we revert back to the training mindset because that's all we've ever done. So there's the secondary mindset called the trusting mindset, which is the mindset that athletes describe when they're really going good and when they're at their best. And the trusting mindset is what lets it out. And that's very much opposite of the training mindset. Whereas the training mindset is analyze, criticize, judge what's happening. The trusting mindset is almost like to believe, to support, and to accept what's happening. So rather than me criticizing and judging it, I'm observing it and accepting it. I always refer to as making adjustments without judgments. So I'm noticing it and I'm making the adjustment, but I'm not adding the judgment to it. Rather than focusing internally on body parts, the trusting mindset is about focusing externally on targets or strategies. What do I want to do to my opponent rather than what am I doing with my body? Rather than having a very busy mind, it's much more of a quiet mind. Rather than playing the game with your head and your thoughts and your self-talk, it's about playing the game with your senses and with your eyes. Really letting your eyes dictate what's happening. So this trusting mindset is a completely different way of focusing and thinking throughout the course of a game. So if you think about this trusting mindset, it's very much like mindfulness. Mindfulness is about noticing thoughts without judging them. It's about being present, not perfect. It's about being able to make adjustments without judgments. So really this idea of trusting mindset is very much a mindfulness approach to sport and to competing. So if you go down this rabbit hole a little bit deeper, you'll ask a player or coach, well, okay, when we're in practice, what kind of a mindset should we use? And they'll say, well, training mindset. Okay, when we're in competition, what kind of a mindset should we use? We should use trusting mindset. But the trap of that is we develop our habits in training. So if we're 100% training mindset, that becomes our habit for competition. And we can't get into the trusting mindset because we never practiced it. So one of the big pieces to this whole puzzle is in order to be more trusting, to be able to trust your stuff, trust your skills, trust your ability, trust your strengths, you have to practice trust in practice. You have to practice trust in your training. You have to spend over half of your time in the trusting mindset in your workouts. And if you could spend 60% of your time in a trusting mindset in practice, that becomes the dominant habit. So that's sort of it's very abstract. And it was hard for me to make sense of it until I came across Annika Sorenstam's Think Box Playbox. And Annika, Hall of Fame professional golfer, one of the best, probably the best female golfer to have ever played the game of golf. I think she may be the only female professional golfer to score a 59 in a regulation round. So she dominated one of, you use the phrase GOATs now. She's the GOAT of professional golf,
right?
Greatest of all time. And I remember being at a conference where I got to see her coaches talk about Annika and why she was so good. And when the audience asked her coaches at this conference, they said, why did Annika dominate the way she did? And they said, well, Annika got really good at this mental discipline that she called Think Box Playbox. And I wrote it down and thought, this is kind of cool. I don't know much about it, but I listened, I took notes, and then I kind of forgot about it like we do. We learn and then we forget. Luckily, about 3 years later, Annika herself was the keynote speaker at that very same conference. And one of the audience members raised their hand and said, Annika, how did you dominate women's golf for so long? And she said, well, I developed and practiced and got really good at this mental discipline called Think Box Playbox. And as she described it, she said, as I'm standing away from the ball back toward my clubs, I'm in Think Box. And this is the space where I think. And that thinking might be strategizing. It might be picking a target. It might be thinking about club selection, thinking about the wind. It might also be the other types of thoughts, like some of the worries and the doubts and the insecurities and uncertainties that go through my head. But when I can get past that, then I can pick up a strategy and I'm ready. I cross what's called this imaginary commitment line. And I step into my play box. And this is where I play. And this is where I use my eyes rather than my head. I pick a target. I see the target. I do a little waggle with my club and I hit. And she then explained to the audience, she goes, there are times too often where golfers will be too busy playing in the think box and they're not prepared. And then when they step into the play box, they're too busy thinking in the play box. And she's like, I had to get really good at being able to separate. And then the commentator who was running that interview said, well, what happens if you are in the think box and you go through your routine, you come up with your strategy, you kind of put those doubts to the side and you're ready to cross this commitment line into the play box. And now you're in there and thoughts start to creep in. What do? She goes, I step out and I go through that process again. She goes, there's times when you're in there and you might feel the wind kick up. And you're like, well, I've got a 7-iron, but I feel that wind, maybe I need a 6-iron. And as soon as I recognize I'm thinking in the play box, I step out and I reset and go through my routine again. And as I wrote it down, I thought, you know what? I think our ball players could use this. And I shared it with them, and our coaches are like, we could use this in hitting. We could use this in pitching. In hitting, there's actually a box. That could be the play box. And then I shared it with my volleyball coaches, and they're like, our volleyball players are thinking in the play box all the time. We need to help them develop the discipline and practice the ability to think in the think box, and then step into their place where they're going to serve, receive, step to the back line where they're going to serve, and now they need to be in play box. And that story and Annika's experiences and what she shared with us, it gave me a way to practice trusting mindset.
Yeah.
And really thinking that training mindset is kind of what she's talking about with the think box. And then that play box is really what she's talking about, is that trusting mindset mode. And if we can use practice time to practice think box, play box, and make sure that we're using practice and we're using workouts and we're using our training period to practice idling between thinking box moments and play box moments, that's where we get the practice reps for the trusting mindset. So that think box, play box really resonated with me. And the more I share it with coaches and players, the more they lit up and they're like, we could use this in our sport. And it's funny how it's taken on a life of its own.
Yeah, I can't imagine a sport you couldn't use it in. Well, I'm in my think box right now, man. I can't. There's a lot going on. I want to ask people that are listening to pause, but I don't want them to miss the ending. But man, that's great. Thank you for sharing that. Yeah, I want to know, before we get to rapid fire once again, what are some ways you're growing, Bernie? I mean, are you a podcast guy? Are you a book guy? We love giving book recommendations on here. You gave us that TED Talk and that poem. We talked to Inner Game of Tennis. What's some things that come to mind? How you're growing, and maybe some of those?
Yeah, I guess two thoughts come to mind. The first is, one of the things that I've kind of landed on with the Pirates is there's learning for your job and there's learning from your job. And I think the stuff that you described is a lot like learning for your job. We can read books, we can go to podcasts, we can hit these conferences and clinics, and we're learning for our job. One of the things that I've been focused more on is how do you learn from your job?
That's good.
So for me, that's more of that sort of professional self-reflection. And that's been a big part of what I've been doing recently, is trying to be more deliberate after something significant happens, taking time to meditate on it, taking time to reflect on it, taking time to pull out some of the lessons learned, write down some of the ways ahead. And that was, I guess, sort of my newer approach to learning from my job, is learning from the experiences I have within it and being able to carry them forward. If I look at how I'm learning for my job, I'm probably more of a podcast guy. Because I'm a very, very bad distance runner. So one of the ways that I get my mind off of running is I'll throw on a podcast, and for 45 minutes to an hour, I can listen and learn at the same time. So that's one of the ways that I kind of digest new ideas, digest new materials. And for some reason, suffering allows me to think through things better. So as I'm suffering through a run, I can hit pause and then think about how that idea that I just heard might play out in my environment, in baseball, my environment, in volleyball, and how some of our players or coaches could benefit from it. So I think a lot of it's a couple of the running and the podcasts.
Yeah, it's good. It's good. Hey, who do we, I know you haven't listened to the previous 78 episodes, but who do we need to have on the podcast that we haven't had on yet, or somebody that you would suggest?
Yeah, you had many or most of my Pirates go-tos. Yeah. I would say then if I had to give you a couple names, because I mentioned Nate Zinser from West Point several times here, you probably want to hear straight from the guru's mouth and get Nate on the show. The other two, again, the two coaches that I'm extremely enamored by and have learned a ton from, it's Dan Fisher from Pitt Volleyball, and John Mayer from LMU Beach Volleyball, Loyola Marymount Beach Volleyball, the head coach there. And I've had a chance to kind of see their programs from the inside out, and both are doing incredible things, remarkable things with their women, with the philosophy and the culture they bring to that, and in two very different ways. So personality-wise, they're 180 different from each other, but there's some commonalities in how they approach things. But what I really like about both those guys is they do wear the white belt. They're more interested in learning from you than teaching you. And in fact, I guess one of the podcasts I listen to most often is John Mayer's podcast called Coach Your Brains Out. Okay. And it's a podcast that he and 3 other beach volleyball players got together, and they just wanted to learn from people. So they invited them on their show once a week to learn from them, and it turned into a podcast. And wow, it's a very strategic way of being selfish in getting better. Is they just brought people on they wanted to learn from, and they were the guests for the show. And it turned into some really fascinating episodes.
That's cool. Thanks for sharing. I didn't know if you meant the artist there for a second, John Mayer. That probably gets confused a lot, right? Well, hey, let's go. Let's go to rapid fire to finish. If you need longer, go right ahead. I call it 3-pointers, but I feel like I should call it like 3 serves or something for you, maybe to get you back to the tennis days. But number one, if people could learn one thing from this talk, Bernie, and just hold on to one thing, what would you want that one thing to be?
The value and performance enhancing benefits of stress and nervousness, and that they're an ally in our fight toward excellence. They're not the enemy.
Good. Number two, if Bernie could have come over here today and been Kevin and asked Bernie a question, what question would have you asked that I did not ask?
What was my biggest failure and my epic failure, and how have I evolved from that or changed because of that?
That's good. Some people do that. Not that you have to share maybe the failure, but what was your response to that for people that are listening?
I went through a period in 2012 where I watched my leader get raked over the coals from the media, ESPN, all the different national news sources. And he basically wore some of my mistakes. He basically wore some of my ideas and my principles that were getting crucified and blown up out there. And he protected me from a lot of that by owning them as his. And I handled that situation really, really terribly and started to second guess myself, started to worry about myself, became very selfish. And I guess through that process, as I reflect back on it, the one thing I learned from it is you need to know what you're willing to get fired over. I think once you know what you're willing to get fired over, then you're at peace. And now you can go about things freely. At that point, I was too afraid to get fired over these ideas that I didn't know what I stood for anymore. It's like, well, these ideas, everybody hates them. Kyle's getting blown up because of them. These are my ideas and I'm hiding from them now. And I'm worried maybe I should take them out of the curriculum. Maybe they're not good. Maybe I shouldn't teach them anymore. And I found that I was second guessing some of my core principles. And through that process, at the end of it, when I came out of it, at least, I realized now I know what I'm willing to get fired over. And some of those ideas now, if I'm told I can't teach them, then that's not the right place for me. I need to be willing to part ways and say, well, that was one of my core principles. I'll shake your hand and thank you for the opportunity, and I'm out. Because I'm not willing to sacrifice that anymore. So it took me 2012 to realize what are my, I guess what is Michael Gervais called them? I think his first principles. I know what my first principles are now, and I know what I'm willing to get fired over now. Whereas I didn't know that back in 2012. And I was so afraid of losing my job that I stopped doing my job. I started tiptoeing around these principles rather than teaching them boldly and with confidence and conviction.
Yeah, that's really good. Thanks for sharing. I love that question. Just, what am I willing to get fired over? Finally, good stuff's the name of this. Give us some good stuff in closing or anything that maybe is on your mind right now, Bernie.
The power of gratitude. It's something that those coaches I described, both Dan and John are both very big into the gratitude piece and flexing the gratitude muscle. And I think with the pandemic and the 2+ years that we've been going on through this thing, it's very easy to get marred into things that are out of our control and things that are extremely anxiety producing and all the uncertainties out there. And just there's a tremendous mental health benefit and performance enhancing benefit to take a moment and to flex the gratitude muscle, to recognize what are you grateful for, and what do you want to be appreciative of. So to not lose sight of that during, the challenges that we have with the pandemic and with everything else happening in the world today.
Yeah, I love it. I love it. There you go, man. 3 aces, just like that. You knocked them across here. Only 40 to love, but no, hey, just tell our listeners here where they can connect with you, social media wise, please.
Yeah, I don't do much except on Twitter. So my Twitter handle, I guess if that's what you call it, or how you can find me on Twitter would be Doc Holliday as one word, DOCHOLLIDAY. There's 2 L's. So Doc Holliday _13. And I'll throw up some thoughts, some principles, some quotes, some ideas, 140 characters or less often. So check them out if you want. Maybe there's something that'll resonate with you. Yeah,
they're good. They're good, man. And man, Bernie, this was so good. You're absolutely elite at what you do. It's been a pleasure getting to know you, and I know your impact is felt like none other. So thanks for taking the time and just joining us here and continued success with your journey.
I appreciate it. Thank you for having me on. It's been an absolute pleasure to get a chance to talk with you.
Yeah, for sure. Well, hey, everybody, you can reach out to me at goodstuffkevin@gmail.com. If you're like me, you might go back and watch this one a couple of times. There's so much in here that I think can be really good in this self-awareness and situational awareness part. So really enjoy this episode. When you get a chance, let me know your thoughts. As always, thanks for joining us. And until next time, good stuff.